IAC, or Infrastructure as Code, offers numerous advantages that significantly improves the way organizations manage and deploy their cloud infrastructure. Hi, and welcome to the Get into Cloud podcast. My name is Coyne. Today we're talking about infrastructure as code. At the basic level, infrastructure as code means using configuration languages and tools to define your infrastructure deployment. In a way, you could take a single file, one YAML file, you could deploy a server, you could deploy an entire application, you could deploy an entire data center. That's the power of IAC and infrastructure as code. I'll give an example with an AWS CloudFormation template. You could use the AWS EC2 instance resource for CloudFormation to build a new EC2 instance. This would allow you to pick its image ID, disk and size, key pair, security group, tags, and etc. That's what it means to define infrastructure as code. And not just servers, it's all the resources that are available in the cloud. So I'm not going to go into individual IAC tools and how to use them specifically. I'm going to talk a little bit about which ones there are at the end. But I want to talk a little bit about from a theory perspective as why you would use infrastructure as code. Why are companies choosing to utilize these tools to define their infrastructure as code? One of the big reasons to use infrastructure as code is consistency and standardization. Infrastructure as code allows for the definition of infrastructure using these configuration files, and so it ensures that environments are consistent across development, testing, and production. Furthermore, if you have, for instance, I worked at a software company that would deploy multiple single-tenant environments for their customers, and you want each customer to have a consistent experience for the infrastructure that's deployed for them. So whether you have repeated deployments for different customers or you just have multiple environments for dev, test, UAT, and production, and maybe staging and performance, a number of different environments, you want to ensure consistency across those environments. And standardized configurations can reduce the risk of any kind of drift between those configurations, any inconsistencies, and giving you more predictable and reliable deployments. If you're using infrastructure as code, you won't run into issues where someone who's using ClickOps or hand configurations are having trouble with the environments coming up or failing, or those kinds of issues. The second big benefit of infrastructure as code is that you can version control your infrastructure. Utilizing version control systems, you can save the old versions and changes, keep track of all the changes that you've made to your infrastructure as code configuration files, and you'll be able to track the changes, see what's changed over time. You could roll back to a previous state and collaborate with other individuals who are working together on your operational infrastructure or in your DevOps environment. And so you get that transparency, accountability, the ability to audit and understand the evolution of the infrastructure as it's changing by utilizing version control systems along with your configuration files. The next key advantage is speed and agility. Once you have infrastructure as code in place, you can layer automation on top, and this is going to accelerate the deployment process. It's going to allow you to be much faster in getting environments up and running. So as I mentioned before, you might be a company that does single tenant environments for all of your customers. You don't want them to have to wait for servers to be built and configured and all of this kind of thing. With infrastructure as code, you can have pre-built environments ready to go or predefined environments in your IAC and simply have automation stand up those new environments very fast. And as I mentioned before, those are going to be consistent, they're going to be fast, and then you can just bake in some of your, maybe some key arguments for each client that allows you to customize the deployment as it's deployed because infrastructure as code tooling allows you to feed in some parameters and arguments and things like that during the deployment process, which would allow you to give a per customer single tenant deployment very, very quickly. And we know that onboarding to a new software or a new application, it can be a bad experience for your client if they have to wait for you to deploy their environment. If it's a wait of days and weeks to get a new environment up, that's not a great experience to have at the beginning of your relationship with your customers. Another big benefit is cost optimization. Infrastructure as code enables organizations to manage costs by prescribing approved build configurations. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but having your configurations defined in infrastructure as code allows you to preset a number of deployments that are approved by the company. So when folks use these patterns and these blueprints that you've built to deploy, it means they're going to deploy in a fashion that's going to align with cost optimization. So for instance, you might build a CloudFormation template that builds a Nginx stack with Python application servers behind it and a load balancer in front. So your stack is going to have a number of EC2 instance sizes. Let's say if you were going down the EC2 route, you might have a number of EC2 instance sizes baked in to your infrastructure as code deployment. So when that CloudFormation template is deployed, they choose from some pre-approved instance type sizing, and they don't just choose some very large instance type or something like that that's going to cost a lot of money. So using IAC allows you to kind of narrow down the approved build patterns for your internal customers so they know that they can deploy those with confidence, that they're not going to be outside of what finance and the IT team potentially approves. Another huge advantage along that same line is security and compliance. So infrastructure as code also allows you to implement security best practice and compliance standards directly into your configuration code. So you know that if folks are using your blueprints to deploy their environments, they're getting all of the security and compliance baked in. And then that means if you need to make changes from a security and compliance perspective, you can update and version your infrastructure as code with new updates that meet those security or compliance recommendations. And then you can work to apply that across the environment. So anyone who has potentially used that code in the past, you could make an update and then they can apply those changes to get those changes downstream. So it's a great way to put guardrails around your cloud infrastructure and effectively build a set of reference architectures and blueprints that folks can confidently use and know that they're going to be within security and compliance guidelines because they're deploying out of the book of approved infrastructure as code modules or blueprints or reference architectures. And some common infrastructure as code languages for AWS is CloudFormation. So CloudFormation templates are baked in, are the configuration language that is baked into AWS. You can go to the CloudFormation screen and deploy directly there without any configuration or setup, and it uses your own login to do those deployments. Another common one is Terraform. Terraform is a multi-cloud and really multi-system infrastructure as code language, and it covers pretty much all the clouds. You can do everything down to ordering pizza from Domino's with Terraform. So it's a very powerful tool that you can use to write infrastructure as code and deploy infrastructure with it. I'll probably have an episode dedicated to Terraform specifically coming up soon. In the world of Azure, they are called ARM templates. And these are templates that are baked into Azure that you can use to deploy Azure infrastructure and resources on Azure. Azure has something interesting as well. You can go into an existing Azure subscription and you can download the ARM template for the resources that are there. So they have a way for you to generate ARM templates from existing infrastructure. Then you could use that ARM template to deploy a copy of the infrastructure somewhere else. Another popular tool for Azure is called Bicep. And Bicep is an Azure specific tool that is used to deploy infrastructure in Azure. GCP has its own scripts. I'm not actually very familiar with what GCP is using, but I know a lot of folks tend to want to use Terraform for GCP instead of the native tool and tend to like it a little bit better. As far as my recommendation is concerned, I would recommend if you are focused on AWS, you should understand the AWS CloudFormation template very well, understand how to deploy resources with CloudFormation templates. CloudFormation templates is the tool and language that AWS uses for its quick starts. And you'll see for most of the AWS geared writing and code online, much of it is in CloudFormation. In terms of outside of AWS specific, I would say Terraform is a great tool to learn. It is probably the most common infrastructure as code tool across all clouds and even inside of AWS. It is much faster than CloudFormation, much easier for you to code in, and it's a much more approachable language than CloudFormation or some of the other tools and approaches as well. So for the 1-2, if you're focused on AWS, I would say CloudFormation should be your first to help you understand the basics of how those work. And then Terraform should be close behind, if not at the same time, learning Terraform to be able to understand how to deploy Terraform on AWS as well. One thing to remember, while the term infrastructure as code is very popular, infrastructure is not code at the end of the day. So things like testing your infrastructure as code scripts, probably not as necessary as it is with traditional code. And once it's built correctly once, you're pretty much done with that code. You may reuse it for other environments, and that's fine, but you really don't need kind of full testing. You don't need to be beholden to some of the very sophisticated kind of approaches to managing code and deployments and things like that. Treating infrastructure as code gives you a lot of advantages, but you don't need to bring all of the things that code does into the world of infrastructure because it is still very different. So I would say you'll want to take the things that from the code world and the software development world that give you the benefit for the deployment of your infrastructure and leave the stuff behind where you don't necessarily see any benefit. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Get Into Cloud podcast. I created this podcast to help people just like you who want to start and accelerate their cloud careers. Please take the time to like, subscribe, click, follow, do all the things on whatever platform that you use to listen to this podcast. We want to spread the word so that everyone can know that there's a pathway for them to get into cloud. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for your help. Have a good day.